Thanks for joining us. With Republican State Senator Ed McBroom, we'll be talking about financial disclosure, which is our lead story, along with the problems at MSU. On the OTR panel this week, Chad Livengood, Clara Hendrickson, and Lauren Gibbons. Sit in with us as we get the inside out, off the record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Martin Waymeyer, a full-service strategic communications agency, partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and public policy engagement. Learn more at martinwaymeyer.com. And now, this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubic.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Studio C on this busy week in our town. The governor has two political hot potatoes that she's juggling, one in her own legislative backyard and the other one on the MSU campus. Let's take a look. Michigan voters adopted Proposal 1 last November, ordering the Michigan legislature to force politicians to disclose the sources of their income. Since 2005, Democratic Senator Moss and Republican Senator McBroom have been trying to do just that, but have consistently failed. But today, for the first time in the Senate, there was a committee debate on financial disclosure. And Senator Moss was very upbeat about replacing the old system of relying on lawmakers to self-disclose their finances.
This is objectively a huge step forward compared to the system that does not hold our elected officials accountable.
But not everybody in the room was overjoyed. The legislation mandates that everyone from the governor on down through the House and Senate must disclose all sources of income over $1,000, along with their assets and debts and positions they may hold with other employers. And while the proposed law orders the spouses to report their occupation, that's it. There's no disclosure of their income nor the incomes of other family members. Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson says that omission makes the disclosure in this law relatively ineffective. And this former lawmaker was even more blunt as it relates to what he thought the voters wanted.
You are making a hole in this legislation which will invalidate the will of the people, the intent of this legislation, and it will be a hole that you can drive the Titanic through.
Senator McBroom argues that if you make too many changes at this 11th hour, it could kill this first step toward financial disclosure. And Senator Moss tries to reassure citizens this is not the last bite of the disclosure apple.
I hear the chorus of those lamenting that we didn't go far enough. Our Prop 1 legislation is not an end, but a long overdue beginning to finally implementing transparency laws.
There were also gripes about how lawmakers do not have to disclose a lot of what lobbyists spend on them. A committee vote on this package is expected next week. Well, the governor, when we met with her yesterday, basically said that if they put the language in to have the spouses report their income, that she would sign it. But she had reservations. What did you make of the governor's comments, Lauren?
Yeah, so she was talking about spousal disclosure and being a little uncomfortable with it, and mentioned that there was some concern about its impact on female candidates and their male spouses, which I thought was really interesting because I have studied a lot of different financial disclosure practices around the country, and most of them do have financial requirements for spouses in some capacity. In fact, Nevada, where the legislature is slightly majority women lawmakers, also has disclosure for spouses. So I'm not sure that I've seen data that backs up any concerns about female candidates struggling with spousal financial disclosure. That said, that seems to be one of the hangups in the legislature as the financial disclosure package gets rolled out. That and gift disclosure by non-lobbyists, that was a big concern among transparency advocates as well, wondering, whether travel or other non-lobbying gifts provided by individuals looking to get influence with the legislature were covered.
Yeah, it's not the only hang-up, though. There are now two competing proposals. You have the package in the state Senate, a package that's identical in the state House, but also another alternative that's more expansive than what has been put forward. It would go beyond what Proposal 1 requires in terms of the list of politicians that would be subject to disclosure requirements. It would include members of the State Board of Education, university governing boards, and beyond including a more expansive spousal reporting requirement. requirement, it would increase the penalty for late filing and for filing inaccurate or incomplete reports. So it's sort of, we hear this refrain that it's a new day in Lansing, but now they have two different directions they
Don't
could
get
go.
too excited about that last proposal, because the Speaker of the House apparently ain't signing off.
Well, yeah, and it's really interesting. I mean, you got Representative Angela Whitwer to sponsor this as one of the lead sponsors, and she's just recently been called into question about her ownership of a public relations firm with contracts with a state agency, the Department of Education, and other government agencies that require or rely upon appropriations from the committee that she chairs. This is the whole point of these disclosures, is to get open up the secrets here in town that have been there forever. And it's interesting about the governor's comments yesterday. 4 weeks ago to the day, a former Speaker of the House, Rick Johnson, was sentenced to prison for 55 months in office, 55 months in prison because of taking bribes while he chaired the marijuana licensing board. One of the bribes that they say that the prosecutors say he took was phony payments to his wife to be a consultant, when it really was just to basically pay off Rick Johnson. That if they had financial disclosures, someone would be able to see that Jan Johnson was employed by such and such marijuana lobbyists, and marijuana lobbyists have business before Rick Johnson. This is the whole point of making spouses disclose this, and so for the governor to kind of come out and kind of pour cold water on it is kind of a curious position to be taken.
Well, she was very clear. She said, this is nothing that I've asserted, but she did say, the question was, Governor, should spouses be reporting their income? And she said, they will put it, quote, they will put it in and I will sign it.
Well, yeah, and just to be clear, Senator Whitmer co-sponsored legislation that would require spousal income to be disclosed. And as a candidate, she said she was in favor of the federal system, which does apply to female members of Congress. Alyssa Slotkin and Debbie Stabenow and Debbie Dingell have all had to comply with this with their own spouses over the years. And so that's what, it's kind of an interesting position to be staking out.
Senator Moss says, I will not let you basically rain on my parade. Mm-hmm. Okay, we've been trying for 1,000 years to do this. He didn't say shut up and go home, but he clearly was, I think, not overreacting to the reaction in town that this was good. It's described as a good first step.
Yeah, I mean, it's what's required by the constitutional amendment that voters approved last year. It was a ballot proposal that passed by a wider margin than any of the other constitutional amendments on the ballot, but they've saved the most popular proposal for last. They've, passed legislation to implement Proposal 2 and Proposal 3, and now they have this end of the year deadline to pass what Proposal 1 requires. They'll start with that probably, but they've left the door open to go back and expand it. The question is, the filing deadline for financial disclosures is April of next year. It's an open question whether or not they add on to it before that first deadline.
I think the other question to consider here is momentum. The legislature has to do it now. This is a conversation that voters compelled them to have. When will lawmakers be as compelled again to do this? If they're going to do it, if they're going to go beyond, why not do it while you have all those bills in front of you, while you're looking at the legislation? I guess I just wonder if, in future months and years, if lawmakers will similarly want to go back and do this. They have not wanted to do it before now.
We should also talk about the non-lobbyist loophole, where a 501c4 that's just an organization is going to educate you, not lobby you, can essentially pay for your travel to go anywhere. And I kind of raised the question of the example of what's the difference between Charles Koch's company lobbying you and Charles Koch funding Alec to send you on a trip to the Bahamas. That actually happens every term, and it's not just Charles Koch. We know that former House Speaker Lee Chatfield used a 501c4 to travel all around the country and other parts of the hemisphere while he was Speaker of the House, and take other lawmakers with him on these junkets. All that would not get discussed disclosed under these current bills. Nobody's really going after that.
The governor also has weighed in very heavily, Lauren, on the situation at MSU, where there's been a call for the chairwoman to resign, and she obviously has said she's done nothing wrong. Take me down the road on what the governor's trying to accomplish here.
Well, I think it's a pretty difficult road, considering the way that trustees are elected right now is a statewide ballot. Now, in a lot of other states, governors appoint university boards. They're looking at whether that's feasible. I think our guest has talked about the feasibility of that and has supported change in Michigan. But Governor Whitmer is also an MSU grad. She's looking at this from the perspective that I think a lot of other Michigan State graduates are wondering. The question of accreditation has come up now. There's been a lot of drama with the Board of Trustees in recent years, but these are some very serious questions now that not just the governor, but a lot of people around Michigan are really paying attention to.
Well, the appointees come from a political convention. And the idea is that the politicians say, this is a nice way to reward your players. Give them a nice seat on a board. You get to sit in the press box and stuff like that. Your take on the governor's involvement?
Well, as you mentioned, it's a weird system that we have in Michigan where political parties get to nominate candidates. It goes to the ballot. Those are some pretty low turnout elections and races.
People have no idea who these people are.
Sure. And Governor Whitmer said yesterday that she is supportive of changing that system. What that would look like, we'll see. But it's sort of interesting that now there's this bipartisan call that's coming to a head because of this latest controversy at MSU.
This is all about power, and all politics is local, and for the governor to be kind of playing in this sandbox is.
She's not in the sandbox. She's also bringing in the sand.
She is, yes. And so, the governor has clearly some allegiances with some people on that board, and they're part of one of the two warring factions. There's someone in the middle, though, Sandy Pierce, a Huntington Bank executive, who's not part of the two four-person factions. That's the person kind of watch here. This is all going to come to a head when this board tries to decide to hire a president in the next 30 days. They've made it clear. The search committee has said they want to do this by Thanksgiving. You had the interim president who clearly wanted the job for months, and then out of nowhere, Teresa Woodruff said in August that she was dropping out, and then 3 weeks later, the scandal hits the football coach, and then of course all hell has literally broken loose since then.
Well, the governor didn't have to put this line in her opening comment, but she did, and she basically said there was no leadership on this board, and it's from top to bottom, and she didn't have to put that in, so obviously she feels very strongly about this.
I think that's true, and I think that really shows the gravity of the situation, right? This is serious now. This drama has extended well beyond the university walls. It is not just affecting all of the people at Michigan State, although it is affecting them quite a bit. This is a national news story because of all the stuff with the football coach, and everything since then has continued to ramp up the drama. People are watching all around the country, and so the governor does feel like she needs to be involved.
And the question is, if you're somebody pondering about taking the MSU presidency job, what kind of disclaimers or information would you want in your contract?
Seriously, I'm wondering why the university might not just consider putting that hiring process on pause for now. Who's going to want to take this job when the board that's supposed to supervise them is such a mess right now? I wouldn't sign up for it.
Someone's going to negotiate themselves a golden parachute
Sure.
just in case.
Yeah. By the way, I had a conversation with former Governor Engler, and he said he tried to get the governor's appointive power when he was in office and failed, but he thinks the atmosphere might be now good to move on this thing. And
He's also one of the last 5 people who tried to be president of that university.
Yes, as nobody has
Didn't work out
forgotten.
very well.
All right, let's call in Senator Ed McBroom up north. You got snow up there yet, Senator?
Fortunately, no, not yet.
Yeah, well, stay tuned, okay? You've heard our conversation here about the financial disclosure stuff. Were you surprised at the negative reaction to what you folks are trying to do?
Not really. I've been around long enough to know how you folks in the media are. There's always a little bit bigger bite of the apple you'd like to have on some of these issues, and so and understandably so, justifiably so. So I wasn't surprised that the immediate feedback was this doesn't go far enough.
But you also think that the spousal reporting, somebody can get around that if they want to.
Yeah, I don't have a problem adding the spousal reporting. I think that's fine. But I also believe that those who are looking to skirt the law will find a different way to skirt the law if we close up this loophole. We'll be chasing loopholes forever. That's the way laws work for people who want to break them.
Senator, do you feel as though there's appetite to, especially when you heard the testimony from the Secretary of State, former Representative LeGrand, is there appetite to make any tweaks at this point? Is there time? I know you mentioned it's October, and it's a couple more weeks of legislature.
I think there's for sure going to be some significant changes regarding the penalty, the levels of the penalty. The ability to say to someone who has failed to file these reports and pay their fines that they can just go take their seat in the legislature. We definitely, I think, have the appetite to mirror the current CTE affidavit that prevents somebody from taking their seat until that's completed. I think the spousal issue has probably got enough horsepower and corporate support that that'll happen as well.
What do you mean by corporate support?
Oh, not corporations. I'm talking corporately amongst the body of legislators. Support.
A good clarification. Thanks to both of you. Clara.
Senator, have you had a chance to review the alternative proposal put forward by House Democrats earlier this week? And if so, did you like what you saw?
I didn't bother to review it. I heard it was dead in the water before it even got off of the shore.
But, Chad, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, but you all have left the door open for expanding what you've introduced. So what could that look like? Would it look something like what House Democrats put forward?
Well, from the details that you're talking about that was in that package, I think those are some of the things I just referenced: higher penalties, the spousal disclosure. I think that one of the things that they wanted, I think, is to have a more specific detail on the numbers, rather than just say where your income's coming from and it's over 1,000. I want to know precisely what that income is. I think that that's not a really great road to go down. This isn't a program so we can measure everybody's individual wealth or poverty. These are opportunities to see what are we disclosing and what conflicts do we potentially have regarding eventual legislative work that we're doing. And so I'm kind of resistant towards the idea that we should make this into a wealth measuring stick. But ultimately, I've also suggested to the majority that they just let the whole legislative amendment process flow, that it not be the usual preordained what amendments are going in, what amendments aren't. Just, hey, let members suggest and make their best case and let the members vote freely and see what happens at the end. I'm comfortable with that.
It will be interesting to see if the majority is comfortable with that. But why are you keeping these non-lobby groups out of the meal and trip travel disclosure requirements?
Well, I'm not keeping that out. I don't feel like this legislation is the place that belongs. I'm very supportive of that. You guys all heard me say that when the Chatfield scandal broke, that we definitely need to start limiting the use of these nonprofit corporate accounts. We need to have better reporting requirements on them. I think we need to have much more restriction on how money flows into the leadership accounts and particularly into the caucus coffers. I think that's where the real influence happens, not so much in whether, DTE takes me to a lunch or not, which they probably don't anymore. But I think that we're really in need of more disclosure on these other items, and I'm supportive of that.
Senator, do you have the two-thirds?
But it's not in this.
Excuse me, sir. Do you have the two-thirds vote in the Senate to change the Constitution to allow the governor to appoint board members?
I don't know if we're quite to 2/3 yet, but I think once people start to recognize that this isn't about saying the voters aren't doing a good job. This isn't about taking away the voters' ability to participate, but it's recognizing that the parties don't provide the voters good candidates. The parties are picking people who just want free tickets to the game or throw the best tailgate party in the parking lot at homecoming. We need a much better vetting process, and the parties are not going to give that to us. And here, these three institutions are the outliers nationwide. Nobody else does it this way. And look at all the problems we're having. So I do think we can make the arguments. I think we can get there, particularly with the support of not just this governor, but bipartisan governors of the past. I think we can move this forward. And I even have board members currently sitting and ones in the past who are saying we should be making this change. This has gone on long enough.
Senator Engler, or former Governor Engler, said what they should have done back then was make it proactive maybe 5 or 10 years down the road so that the current sitting governor, he or she, would not have that power. Would you favor that kind of an amendment and adjustment to it?
Well, initially, and my current proposal allows those who are currently serving to finish out their terms, and so it would be prospective. But with all of the turmoil going on at MSU, I'm not so sure that we shouldn't make it much more quickly happen. So it would be after next November, after the election. Maybe we need to suggest removing the entire board right away and then staggering the terms. But we could do it the other way I've already proposed, which would be to let them all finish their terms too. Whichever way we do it, let's get there. I think that's just a detail to work out.
Do you feel that that's the best case scenario for Michigan State then, is to just start over?
I think that at present, with the long running, I mean, this is almost 10 years of my time in service that there has been a plague of scandals at MSU and pop-up scandals at U of M and Wayne State. It's time to get this done and kind of tear the bandage off and move ahead.
To go back to your example about DTE for a second, if DTE sets up a nonprofit organization to educate voters and lawmakers about energy issues, and they pay for your meal, but that doesn't have to get disclosed under this financial disclosure law. But if DTE's a registered lobbyist comes to you, Dave Pausrock, and wants to lobby you on something, Dave has to disclose that. What's the difference?
I don't think there is a difference. All I've said is that the law that we're proposing is not the place to do that. We need to go into the Campaign Finance Act, where the reporting you're referencing is already occurring for those who are registered lobbyists, or we need to create another act. This response to Proposal 1 is about us reporting personal holdings and personal participation in other groups, boards, employment. And so I just don't see this being the right act for it. It's not that I oppose that happening. And I think we saw this controversy come up just a couple of months ago when the Attorney General had the situation where she had taken a trip. It was paid for by somebody who wasn't a lobbyist, therefore it wasn't disclosed. I think that really clarifies that we should be disclosing these things, and I support getting there.
Senator, who's your candidate for U.S. Senate and candidate for president?
I don't.
Why are you laughing and why are you pausing?
Because I haven't decided yet. I just met Mike Rogers a couple weeks ago. I had dinner with Nikki Snyder at the Lincoln Day dinner this past weekend. I like both of them, and so I'm not prepared. I don't generally do endorsements anyway, so I don't know yet.
Well, I assume you're not voting for President Trump.
I haven't made that decision yet either. I'm prepared that he's probably going to be our candidate, and I'll probably need to vote for him.
Senator, on the topic of political nominating conventions, do you think that Michigan should also do away with them for Secretary of State and Attorney General? It didn't seem to work out so well for your party last election.
Yeah, I think that the primary system for both of them would far more efficient for everybody. I think that there's really no reason why they haven't gone that direction, and that it's very confusing to a lot of my voters why it hasn't. I heard that numerous times in the last cycle when people were like, why aren't we voting for these? How did this person become candidate? I don't remember this. Well, it's because you didn't. It was in the convention. So I think that there's good reason to move this out of the convention setting.
How are you going to break what I would call the consultant class that controls the conventions, that make money off of the conventions? They get candidates and they line up votes, and they make sure that people get nominated who pay them.
In other words, put John Yob out of work.
Thank you, Tim.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I don't know that I have the answer for how I can do that. I don't have that power. I'm just one vote, but I certainly believe that it's a far more transparent system for the voters, and it would be more efficient for everyone. These convention races, they don't prove anything to the voters about whether or not you're really qualified for the job. I think the parties usually do a better job vetting those particular persons than they do with the board members. And I've introduced legislation to even change the way we nominate the State Board of Education so that it would get representation around the state rather than isolate it to Southeast Michigan and Grand Rapids as it usually does.
Senator, thank you very much for joining us on our program. Now you got to go out and take care of the dairy cattle, right?
That's next on the agenda.
Yeah, there's a segue there somewhere. Senator, thank you. Also, thanks for a great panel. See you guys right here for more Off the Record next week.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Martin Waymeyer, a full-service strategic communications agency, partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and public policy engagement. Learn more at martinwaymeyer.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan Public Television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.